she's the only one who I know who's not coming. Yep.
Which means I'm not getting like this. Excuse you. Okay.
Devices don't sync up the passwords, it won't give you the email.
Right. You got her what they? Oh yes. Questions.
Yeah. I assumed that you were going to ask me
What are your questions?
I mean,
They were right
what
here.
I planned.
It's right there? No.
Oh, except all my stuff is
I'll be right back.
behind me.
All right. Thank you. How are you?
All over the place. But you know what? I looked up and it was 4 o'clock. I'm like, hey, shit.
Come here.
So you went to 30p.m. Okay. So you got more time.
Show me, I don't know what you're talking about.
Dan, is what's in this book different from what was put in the
Oh, I took this.
Steel containers.
No, actually,
Recycled.
Is what's in this book that we received the other day exactly the same as this that's in front of us?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is redundant.
the little top and everything. I'm like, okay.
Okay, all right, so that's probably oh, yeah.
You review it and then I just send you like codes to other markets.
Current, is it, are all the questions
No.
integrated into this?
I told Leah later, she called me so much. Okay, that makes me
Actually, these are different.
and everything else like it. Talia. Right here. Thank you, my love. You're welcome.
Yeah, these are not the same. So these are mutually exclusive, right?
Yes.
Questions are.
It's the same. These are they're exactly the same. I just put them here just in case you guys bring your yeah. This one? Oh, you know, Daniel.
This is just.
Yeah. So I'll just move it to the side here. One is just the question district advocate, and one is the question answer.
And I need to bring that up too. Because I have a problem with us making.
Depends on whether this actually produces sound.
There we go. There we go. It's better.
Ruth, you sure?
All right, good evening, everybody. Today is April 4th, 2019, and I'm calling to order this meeting of the Board of Education. Hope everybody's having a good week so far. I was telling one of your colleagues that I happened to be in the building, and this person said to me, "Good morning." And it really, this is no BS, it really started my day off right. I'm constantly trying to tell you all that the little things count, and you know, you don't necessarily have to, we expect and hope that you increase the graduation rate by 3 or 4 percentage points. That would make a lot of people smile. But as we wait for that, Dan and others, there's little things you can do. So I would encourage you all to do that. When you see somebody do something good, tell them that. If you want to make somebody feel good, just say something simple as good morning. It can make a difference. So without further ado, Commissioner Powell is going to help me out and help the rest of us out. She's going to take the gavel and run this meeting. Thanks, Commissioner Powell.
Thank you. Thank you, President White. So my philosophy on managing the budget deliberations is simply this: to allow everyone the opportunity to ask their questions until they're satisfied or until we're too exhausted to continue, whichever comes first. So we will go like down the line, and everyone will have an opportunity to ask questions. Because everyone is assured of getting that opportunity, let's try to ask one question at a time rather than stacking our questions. And we'll just go through from one end of the table to the next until all questions are satisfied. Because budget revenues fall in sections 1, 2, and 3, I have asked the administration to start us with a conversation about the difference between the budget that they put together based on the governor's executive budget and what we now know to be the actual state aid because the budget passed. So that's how I'd like to start off our conversation. The administration is going to make their pitch for how we want to allocate the new revenues. It's up to the board then to decide, along with the rest of the budget, whether they want to support the administration and the administration's decision or to do something else. But that's farther down our process. Dr. Lowenborn?
In lieu of mailing all that money to Everton, we do have a different plan. What I prepared for the board was people who came up on Tuesday and asked for various things. I've listed them on this sheet that you have in front of you. Some, our decision is still where it was, a reduction, and we're not asking you under the column that says possible use of additional money. Others, we've been thinking about it. There is about 5.88 million. I still think some of that should go into our fund balance or a contingency, but let's look at some of the running requests, and also that the administration feels strongly they need additional funding. So home and hospital, they have a reduction, but they've also had a decrease in the need for services. So at this point, we're not asking to modify the budget. Extended learning time has really taken a huge hit because of the A fund. And so as you look across there, we're still not going to be able to fund Quad A, Center for Youth. We'll talk more about that, Generation 2 tests, and AmeriCorps. But we are thinking that we could add 1.1 million to try to restore the hourly pay at 4 schools. Community schools, and you know that from time to time, extended learning time in community schools seem like the same thing. And again, we had to reduce their budget, but we think it's one of the most valuable things we do. So we would suggest an additional $400,000 go into the following 4 schools to keep the community schools going. The registrars, we had originally moved from 19 to 11. We've heard from them, and we've also heard that we're a little bit worried about the SMS system and making sure that that goes off smoothly. May be an area to cut in the 2021 budget, but we're saying that possibly 3 of the 8 positions that were cut could be added back into the budget. Early college, this is really something that we're going to try to negotiate with MCC again, but quite frankly, they're charging us quite a lot of money to rent space. They also get an income for having our students there because they get charged off to the state. And so we're deciding we're not cutting kids off cold turkey, and we believe in the early child or the early college experience. But what we're saying is for the kids that have earned the right to take college level courses, they will still be on campus at the downtown campus. And we will be talking with other colleges because, as I say, at least state colleges, they receive reimbursement from the state when we have kids that go there and are taking college level courses. Oasis, I've spoken to Clay Harris this week. Many of us were at their facility. There is a small reduction this year. And again, we've got some thoughts about doing some school age things, you know, but it's tough for us to really add money to adult, to what is essentially adult ed. So we're going to work with them. We think that between the city grants and that we can try to improve that. And again, we have a number of kids that are overaged, undercredited, that if they qualified and could be there, that's another way that funding could go their way. And the last is restorative practices. We used to get a grant that would pay for a number of the social work positions. We are not backing off on restorative justice. It's done a great job in our schools, reduced suspensions, improved behavior. So we're suggesting that 8 positions be added to the budget, but there's still a possibility that we'll get a grant, and if that grant would come through, then that money could be moved over to contingency or fund balance. So that only totals up to $2.2 million. There's an additional $3.7 million. There are a couple other requests, special ed, the consent decree, the attendance folks and all that. So there are lots of requests, but at this point, we want to wait and see what the outcome of our this meeting and the next 2.
Thank you. That was a pretty thorough description of the changes between what's in our binders and the state budget that passed. Any questions on this presentation specifically? if you, well, actually, I can't see the lights on the mic, so just find a way to signal by sight or sound, right? Okay, so we'll start at the end.
Okay, so a couple of questions. On the home and hospital, the advocacy that was done this week here at the budget hearing, some of the teachers were expressing that some of these students, that there was a reduction because there was to some degree, an illegal reduction, that not following through with doctor's notes, telling students who were eligible for homeschool that they were no longer eligible for homeschool, but really no real reason medically. And it was not clear to me who was making those decisions and how the reduction actually happened. So I would like, before the board and administration make a decision on these positions specifically, that we do get some clarity around how students are being classified and declassified for homeschool instruction. I have more questions. Should I keep going?
Hold on.
Okay.
Does the administration want to respond to that? And one of the things that you'll see if you haven't been through the budget process, or those in the audience, is very often the questions are more about the efficacy of programs and their oversight. It's always the case that when we talk about money, it really raises questions that underlie the money. Does anyone want to respond to Commissioner LeBron, or do we want to respond in writing, or?
I guess we'll do both, right? Writing and verbally. No cut to the home hospital program will violate any mandated service that a child is to receive. So unfortunately, I wasn't here to hear the question or the statement made last week. But for someone to believe that students would be denied home care as determined as a need, that would not happen.
So let me just say that it's on record too, but we recorded it, but there were some teachers here from the home hospital program, and some of them specifically stated that kids were being declassified, that there was a student particularly who had a doctor's note saying that they needed homeschool, and that someone told them no and had them coming into Hart Street for the education piece when they were supposed to be home, and denied the doctor's note. I'm just throwing it out there because that's what the teacher specifically came in here and said. So I would like more information before we do reductions, that we're ensuring that we're not saying that we have a reduction in services because students don't have needs when they in fact do, and somehow we're not classifying them correctly to give them the services.
Good evening.
Oh,
I spoke with the teacher who made a couple of statements, a few of the teachers, and followed up with the names of those students, and I'm following up with their IEPs, the data, and the documentation that they're talking about. So I spoke with the teacher what was that? I think that was Tuesday,
Mm-hmm.
and then also today. So I'm following up, and we'll have the information.
Okay,
Just
thank you.
And in addition to, I'm sure all my colleagues were concerned when we heard those assertions. So I wonder if one of the things we can do so that it does not become a budget conversation is to get the word out there about whistleblower and what, if anyone does believe that something wrong was done to or around a child's education, that they know how to properly record that concern or complaint, and so that it will be followed up on, right? We shouldn't be waiting until budget time to hear that there's cause for concern and then scramble around looking to find out whether it's true or not.
Okay, do I keep going? Or you want to take turns?
Does anyone else have a question? We'll go around again. Dr. Aquino next, and then Commissioner Hallmark.
Is it possible for the superintendent or chief financial officer to explain to us and to the audience the impact of the budget deficit as it relates to upcoming years, like next year, the year after, and why it is so important to use most of the money, the additional state aid money, for the fund balance?
So, good afternoon, everyone. So, over the years, we have been using a significant portion of fund balance to balance the budget. And just to let everyone know, when we use fund balance to balance the budget, what we're doing is delaying reducing expenditure for that year by using the fund balance and technically kicking the can down the street for a while. Over the years, we have done that. So right now, the street is ending. So when we kick it any further, it's just bouncing against the wall, and we are very close to the wall. Taking this upcoming budget here, $8 million out of the fund balance, when we did a rough calculation, that means we're going to have approximately $34 million in our fund balance. That is, for the size of this district, that is not a place where we want to continue. So as I started putting together my 10-year long-term plan, it's showing that we're going to be using maybe 8 and 8 and ramp it down to 5. My goal is within a 4 or 5 year, we are not depending on fund balance to balance the budget, because basically what it's doing is saying you're spending more money than you actually have coming in. And as a result of that, we keep digging ourselves in the hole, because those dollars that you have taken out accumulate over time. So as we go forward, the plan is to make sure that whatever revenue we have coming in, we are spending less than that, so we can start building back up the fund balance, so the district will be in a healthy position, which at this point in time, that's our goal, to make sure we have that. So over the years, we have been kicking the can, doing these, dipping into fund balance, which now it's kind of like catching up to us, and we have to stop.
And the only thing I would say, even to be more aggressive, is we have gone from $20 million to 8. And I would say for the following year, we should be close to 0. But that'll be tough. And again, you have to look at what enrollment is, and you look at all the programs and all that. And people are going to come forward with every cut. But at the end of the day, you can't spend more than you take in. And what people also don't understand is when we spend more, that means the following year we have to make that money up also. So it'd be like going into your savings account, keeping your expenses the same, and the year after you have to still make up that gap. So you want to get to a spot where you're not going into your savings account at all. That's put aside for when a roof or something else tragic really happens. But it's hard to do. Thank you for that question, but anyhow.
Commissioner Hallmark? Oh, I thought your hand was up. Commissioner White?
A couple things. On this last discussion, the great thing about democracy is it affords people an equal opportunity to express varying points of view. And I want to be the voice to remind people that while it is important that we, and it's one of our primary responsibilities to be sound fiduciary agents, we are most principally, no pun intended, protectors of our children. And our children have significant needs in this community. And I want to be the one, while we got a 7-member board, and that's awesome, and that means that we can have various voices expressing concerns about our financial responsibilities. I'm going to be the one to make sure that our children that have special needs get that money wherever it comes from. Now, maybe it has to come from Albany. Maybe it shouldn't come out of our cookie jar. The blessing here is we have 7 members of the board that can offer different experiences and different perspectives. And I don't have to worry individually, because I know my colleagues and the administration have those other issues protected. We certainly have able staff that can address those issues. But, I look at restorative practices and the sound fiduciary agents say, okay, we got to make sure we don't go into our savings. Well, my God, how much money is this community going to spend if these kids end up going to jail and prison? We know what the numbers are there, right? We have done a remarkable thing in this community because the voices of that relate to protecting our children and making sure that they are whole and providing the resources that are whole, get those resources. And when they don't get those resources, we know what happens. These kids end up in jails, and they end up in prisons, and then prosecutors have to be paid, and police officers have to be paid. Now, maybe it's not coming out of our budget, but it's coming out of our taxpayers' budgets. So, without taking away the comments that have previously been made, I'm going to let you all know that I'm going to be the voice that says, wait a second, why aren't we hiring people to maintain the efforts that we have in the area of restorative practices? This is reaping real benefits, not just socially and psychologically for our children, but financially for the taxpayer, which is what you guys talk about when you talk about being sound fiduciary agents. You're talking about covering the taxpayer's butt, right? And the question is, when we don't do our due diligence here, the taxpayer pays for it. Maybe not out of these coffers, but out of some other coffer. There are going to be jails, and maybe it's the private prison industry. Somebody's making money off the taxpayers. I prefer, if we have to spend money, that we spend, and I'm not just talking about just throwing cash and not, wisely allocating our resources and making sure that we're getting a return on investment. I believe I've always articulated that important objective for this district. But at the same time, we are, no disrespect intended, we are not bankers. We are educators. We are social workers, right? We are charged with protecting children. And I want us to remember that. It's easy to forget that when we're talking dollars and cents and make sure your budget is balanced. Well, heck, the law requires that we balance our budget. There's not been a year that I've been here and not been a year prior to me getting here where we have not had a balanced budget. We are educators, not bankers. And Dan, I'm not just looking at you, right? And we need to remember that. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't be sound fiduciary agents. I'm not denigrating or belittling any comment made by anybody else. But the way to have balance in a democracy is make sure that all voices are heard. And I think it's very important that we remember we are here to educate, protect, hug, surround our children with love. And if that means we have to dig into our wallets, we need to do that. So I wanted to say that. Now, I do want to say, Dan, I need a bit of an explanation. And it's on restorative practices. I just want to make sure I'm reading this table right. In the first table on the second page, it says, under restorative practices, it says 10 positions, 2018, 2019, $717,000. Then if you go to the next column, it says 1920 budget. It says 0 positions. And then in the last column, it says 8 positions, 574,000. So if am I reading this correct? If I conclude that we're reducing the number of restorative practice positions by 2, is that right? But you've previously you said we weren't going to give anything, right? But now we're going back up to 8.
We're going back up to 8, hoping that we will get a grant that will restore even to the 10. And again, I don't disagree with you, President White, but it's not an either-or situation. It really isn't that we're not harming kids by having a budget. Our budget is balanced, but we're not harming them by not going in as deep to our savings account, because the truth is, if we keep going into our savings account, we won't exist as a school district. And again, it's not an either or, and that's why we're having this debate, that we want to provide first for our children, and we are partially bankers because we got a lot of money that we've got to protect the taxpayers' money, both state and local.
Okay, now, President White, that was pretty sneaky of you to get your talking points in the form of a question. But it is important that the administration hear where every board member is on the question of spend versus replenish the savings account. So I'm going to start at the other end and give in addition to questions, or in addition to your next question, if you want to speak to the question of whether you think that the administration's approach is sound, or whether they should spend more, or whether they should save more, now is the time to share that information with the administration so that they can, count the tick marks that they're hiding on their laps and
But I
be ready to
caution you,
change.
it is really
I
not
just-
an either or. It's nice to hear where you stand, but I think most of you know that this is a big budget and we've got to figure out what services kids get and still balance it without digging into our savings account.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I just want to focus on questions.
could we start with Natalie next? She had not had an opportunity to ask a question or to present her viewpoint.
She said she doesn't have anything to say nor a question.
Can we put a microphone in front of her so she can speak for herself?
Can we focus on questions for the budget? I'm very confused about what's going on right now, because I thought, one, we're here to talk about sections 1 through 3. There was a new presentation. I have a lot of questions, and it's this back and forth. I just need to understand what the process is going to be for commissioners to ask questions and get answers from administration. That's it. That's all I want to know.
And as I indicated before, the process is we go down the line and everyone gets an opportunity to speak.
So
And
are
I'm
we
offering
asking one
that
question at a time
Yes.
for each individual section that they just presented? Or
No.
can I just ask all my questions at once?
I would like for everyone to have an opportunity to ask their questions about what was just presented, anything on this table, and we will go down the line as often as necessary, and then we will move on to sections 1, 2, and 3.
So since we're talking about sections 1 through 2, I still need time to digest what was put in front of me. I really am looking at school by school, and this is not a question I'm posing right now, but just so you know where I'm at. I'm looking school by school in regards to where they are with standing by the state regulations and requirements, so if they're in good standing or if they need assistance, and where we have decided to cut in those schools, just to get a full scope of what is happening across each school. And so I need some more time to go through each school to kind of look at that, so I know what questions I'm going to ask. I know we have round 2 coming up next week that the board members are supposed to submit questions, so my questions will be coming in around that, because that's what I'm specifically concerned about. And then another question that will be added onto that is something that you spoke about tonight in regards to early college and the campus. I need to go back and review the 2 contracts that we have so that I make sure that my questions are aligned with what's in the contract.
Commissioner LeBron?
Okay, and extended learning time, which is the next one. I'm just going to pose all my questions for the sheet, and that way they can keep it moving until we get to the second sheet. For the increase of 1.1 million for extended learning time, at school 9, 17, 34, and the Rise School, does that include keeping AmeriCorps in that 1.1 million?
At this point, it doesn't. So on the column right before it, Commissioner, it shows the contracts that have been included but aren't included in the restoration. What we did is at this point just restored the hourly to extend the day. So that's all this column indicates.
So the
for
hourly pay
increase.
for who, though?
Teachers, to extend the instructional day. And that includes a little bit of custodian and nursing services that are required during that time as well.
Okay, and then the increase for $400,000 in the 4 community school site coordinators. What does that mean? 4 community school site coordinators, lead agency contracts. Are those the contracts to the column to the left with Ibero, CCSI, Center for Youth, Gandhi? And also Rise is listed twice, and so is 17. So what schools did we cut from, and why are only these schools getting some of the potential, increases in the
Right.
budget.
So only some schools have ELT and only some schools have the community schools, so that you're going to see overlap here. And then some schools that aren't restored get other supports that you can see over in the first column by the other grants. So the ones impacted by the loss of A are pretty much 9, 17, 34, and RISE for the instructional day. So that's why you see some duplication, because some schools have grants, some schools don't, some schools move to A fund. So it's a combination of a variety of things. So when you see extended day, though, for clarity on that last column, you're right, it's not all the schools. There were 2 schools that were asking not to, at this point, have expanded learning time in their schools
Can
and
you
are
tell me
not
what
included.
schools those are?
They are number 3 and number 45.
And then for the community school piece, are there other schools that are not listed here that also lost funding?
Every school now, if we restore these 4 site coordinators that are community school that have a site coordinator, will all be restored for that particular piece.
Yeah, for the community school site coordinator piece.
Correct.
So these were the 4 that were proposed to get cut initially, but the other schools were able to keep their site coordinators.
Right, because we put them in A, and we didn't do technical services or contracts, and that's why it did impact these particular schools. So at this opportunity, we asked for them to be restored so that they have those supports for the community schools initiative.
And then the last one with the registrars, so you guys were going to, I had questions around this for round 2 specifically, and I'll save some of those for that round, but you're saying increase to 3 positions, so originally there's 19 positions, you're cutting to 11, you want to restore 3 additional, so that would be 14 positions?
That's correct.
And that's primarily because my understanding is that there is going to be a new system that they have to learn in addition to having reductions. One of my questions around that new system was that I had talked to someone that does some of the work, was that the new system doesn't support a barcode on our textbooks, and that was
but we can't fund them if we don't know what they are. And so that's my concern. So I don't know if the budget is too austere right now. I feel that way only because I don't understand if we worked backwards. Do we work from the place of what's the target performance areas in each school? Do we have school plans to drive that? And then how is the district going to support those? And then what are the support services? What are the personnel that are needed to accomplish those performance areas? And so I need to understand where we're going. I think it's something in Alice Wonderland. Someone asked, which way should I go? Should I take road A or road B? And they said, well, where do you want to go? And they said, well, I don't know. Well, it doesn't matter then. It doesn't matter if you take road A or road B if you don't know where you're going. So that's my question. What's the best practice? Do we start backwards? Because how do we go about driving particular areas of progress in each school if we don't start backwards?
Okay. I don't know if anybody else, or I'll start. First of all, I'd argue that we have no strategic plan. We have 4 of them that, and there needs to be work to bring them together to one. But each of our schools has a plan, has been working towards a plan, and not all of them have reached that. But we assume that they don't reach it because of lack of resources, and I believe that's not so. I think it needs to be focused what they do and effort on the people working there and making sure we have wraparound services for all our kids, not just for some of them. So when we go about cutting the budget, we talk to principals, and it's a harder conversation because we say, what can you do without? And there isn't one of our administrators that freely would say, well, I can do without this. And so it's the lesser of several evils in their mind. But the reality is, district-wide, we have 6,500 employees for, again, 26,000 kids. So it's not a matter that schools don't have a plan or that their plan is out of date. It's that we're not used to doing what needs to be done with less resources. And that's really the challenge. Some schools are good at it, others aren't. And we do have to do work on a strategic plan, one plan rather than 4. But at the end of the day, schools know what they need to work on and have resources to get that work done. And that's probably not a great answer that people want to hear, but it just isn't as clean as set your strategies and fund it and then go do it, because we've funded, quite frankly, the board has funded quite a lot over the past few years and prior boards. And so now it's a time that you look at what you have and get things done with what you have.
Do we have a chart of what the key performance areas are that each school wants to progress in so that everyone's watching and following? Is there like just a chart, not of everything in the school plan, but just a chart of what each school, what their target is in key performance areas?
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, so a couple things. So we have been working off our key performance indicators last year as well for the 10% increase. So this year, for the school improvement plan process, we've already started the training for that. So they have a school improvement plan, but per the DE report, we wanted to build a more robust plan around them. At the same time, the state is coming up with new forms for school improvement plans that we are in the midst of. But very clearly, the schools do know what they need to work on to move the major areas around student performance, graduation rates. At the same time, I do want to just clarify that with the new school improvement plan process, they are giving us metrics from the state to begin to benchmark for schools to use so that we all have a common language across the system. And that is something we are literally in the midst of working on now with our schools. At the same time, I do want to say schools do know what our indicators are around ELA, math performance, graduation, chronic absenteeism. These are part of the new ESSA indicators. So we're acutely aware of where we need to have growth. At the same time, when this went out, when the budgets went out to the schools, the goal, of course, is always to cut as far away from the schools as possible. And the superintendent supported continuing the intervention teachers. And actually, at some schools, we increased to make sure that there was more level set across the district based on need. The second thing is the chiefs, and when you look at the programs in schools in Section 4, when we get to that, can talk about once we did give the budgets, although it's difficult in more austere times, that is true. There's not as much flexibility because we have to meet the criteria that we must for certain areas. Work with the principals to make sure where they can find flexibilities to align to what they need to align to their school improvement plan. And so there is a whole picture around that. So at the same time, I do want to focus on that we do have the ESSA indicators, and we continue to use those to guide our work. But that we are in the midst of rebuilding that process and training with our principals.
Is it possible to make that a little more visible? So if you have the indicators, could you put the indicators across the top of a spreadsheet and then the names of the schools, just so that it's visible what the targets are?
We can. Right now, what I will say is the state we did go to training actually last week. We've had some training before. They have not sent us the documents, the templates, or the metrics yet. That should be coming in the next couple of weeks. We are waiting specifically for that. However, we do know, and we haven't come off the 10% of where we need to be as our goal, but this will also give us some growth. So yes, absolutely, we can do that once we get clarified on that.
I have to go back to what Commissioner Shepard said, that if you understand from school to school, one school may have a greater students with disabilities than another school. And so when you're looking at the impact of the budget, that's why I'm trying to understand what kinds of support services.
Absolutely. So a couple things about that, though, and I don't want to go into Everton's territory, but sometimes you see it reflected in their TAPU dollars, how they weight it differently for the different needs of students. But also you'll see across the programs that Keisha's spoken about, and you'll see in the budget, the L services and the special education services, but they can speak more to that. I do want to say, too, though, around when you look at school by school, Title I, all those things are driven by a formula that we must adhere to, and we have that detailed as well, because if you're allocated a percentage, the district is required to give the school that percentage based on their need. So that can be mapped out as well.
Can I ask for clarifying that what you just said, it reflects the floor of what must be spent in any given school, not a ceiling, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Certainly we will get more into that in our second deliberation session when we cover school section. Okay?
Okay. So I say do my other question or wait till later?
We'll go down the line one more time. So Dr. Aquino? Dr. Hallmark?
Yes, I wanted to circle back around to Commissioner Powell's question to the whole group about where we stand in terms of the extra money being given, the 5.9 million, and how we are comfortable in what you suggested, spending 2.2 million of that on the programming and putting 3.7 of that back towards the fund balance. I'm very comfortable with that. I would not be comfortable with putting it all back into the fund balance. I think that there should be step down. So just to make clear my position on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with what Commissioner Hallmark said. I think you're right, Dan. It's not an either-or proposition. These aren't mutually exclusive approaches. Secondly, with respect to Commissioner Davis's question about indicators being reflected in the paperwork as we make our assessment, I believe at our last session we talked about including a little index in Section 4. And this is not my complete question, but will we get that revised Section 4 before we deliberate on it? Because
You're talking about the academic achievement?
yeah, because so when we are required to generate our questions for Section 4, which would be when?
They're due on Monday.
Oh, on Monday? Right. So has that been revised yet to reflect our prior conversation? Because that's, I think, what Commissioner Shepard referred to, and I know that's obviously part of what Commissioner Davis is referring to.
And yes, we are doing that, but if you need a more comprehensive piece, it's in the more comprehensive.
Oh, that one, the supplement that you gave us? Okay.
So what we're going to do, just because we only have a small room, we're summarizing like maybe 3 years, one line for each area, for each school. But if you need the detail of each school in a more comprehensive format, it's actually in
that supplement. All right. But when do you expect to have that revised Section 4?
Revised Section
4.
I'd say we can have it by next week because I think we have the pieces. But again, it's just a summary. So if you look in this book, where it would say
Everton, can you put the mic towards you? Thank
you. Where it would say like the ELA score for a particular school, in this supplement, it will have grade 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. But because of space, we will just put the total for the school, just one line. But if you need to see where each grade is performing, it's here.
Okay, but my question is, for example, Beth had mentioned it, we talk about it quite regularly in the leadership meetings, those primary indicators of success or failure, ELA scores, math scores, out-of-school suspensions, how much do you intend on those finish line points? How much do you intend on including in the revised Section 4? I understand that the supplement gives all that detail, but our citizens won't be reading the supplement. My guess is that many people, if they read the budget, particularly Section 4, they'll be looking at, okay, how is this school doing? Mm-hmm. And we know what those indicators, we talk about them at every leadership meeting. Mm-hmm. Are they going to be reflected in that little table or no?
Yes.
They are in the little table, and they will be on, so you can see it at a glance on one page. The metrics, though, won't be there yet. Now, if we get them and work with the state prior, and obviously accountability, and we're doing that now, then we can reflect it more. If I could add, though, we also are, for the school improvement planning process, we do have a schedule that we want to bring back to the board through our interim superintendent and Linda about a schedule about how to introduce the revised school improvement plans for schools moving forward starting next month. So we do have a plan going forward as well.
But you'll have them the revised profile sheets next week.
Okay, thank you.
And just to clarify, I wasn't looking for the revised profile sheets. I just want the chart.
Yeah.
That'll be like 1 or 2 pages.
Okay. So, well, some of what you need is in the supplement, though. Okay. So my question, I'm going to channel past commissioners Adams and Funches and focus on restorative practices. The fact that it's a part of your restoration sort of jumps it to the head of the line. I feel very strongly that this is something we need to support, and even leaving 2 of those positions off the table is concerning to me. And I'm wondering if our RSO contract, if there are some schools such as School of the Arts that are in a place where they really don't need the SRO the same as other schools, that we could reduce the total number of SROs we're contracting with the city and replace them with restorative practice personnel. Has that been considered? And part two of that question is that I think that our contract with the city is out of sync with the budget. So if we're not in a place that we can do that today, might we be in a place to do that when the contract is up for renewal in the middle of the fiscal year?
And I'm sure Ruth Turner would say that we should definitely trade all of that in and all of that.
I should have said I was channeling Ruth Turner.
Yeah. It was my error that the 8 were left out because I thought a grant was going to cover it. As we see, and I wasn't suggesting that only 2.2 million would be used in restoration because, for instance, with the positions for restorative justice, they should be replaced. We thought 8. If the board thinks 10, that's what we'll do as we get closer to the final budget. Take it out of Ms. Turner's position, but no.
No, but has there been any thought to our RSO contract?
Our RSO contract, I don't know when it comes up, though. I think, is it year to year or not? We'll get back to you if it's
It is year to year, and it does seem to me that it occurred in the middle of our fiscal year, not too many months ago. So I'm planting a seed here with the idea that maybe we're not in a position to make the decision now, driven by the budget, but if we can anticipate some kind of a shift, I'd like to hear from my colleagues as to whether there is a strong desire to move away from RSOs, even if it's only gradually, because now's the time to start planting those seeds.
And again, we're not in a position to do either or. This is something that, depending on the board's wishes, we ought to be able to do both at least through 1920 and then decide from there.
Okay. So I'm going to go back down to the other end of the table. Commissioner Shepard.
So I just want to respond in regards to my stance on the last question that you asked. I do want to lean on the student support services, that group, and them telling us if we should keep the RSOs or SROs in the schools. I want to be careful about saying that certain schools don't need it because we don't know the impact that those officers in those schools have had on that school climate. So I don't want to make a blanket statement like that. But I can say right now that I definitely support restoring all 10 of them, only because I know of the work that they do. But in regards to your question, Commissioner Powell, I do want to lean on the director and the staff of student support services to kind of guide our decision on that.
So I have a couple of questions for these last 3 topics, and then I have a question around special education, which wasn't listed here. So for the early college, the parents the students and staff that came out yesterday to advocate, there was some questions around the reimbursement, and so I see that it says here that there are 2 contracts, $665,000 for use of the facility and $250,000 for food, and seniors and juniors taking MCC classes will be on the downtown campus. I think I just need more clarification around a couple of things. There seems to be some confusion or the notion or understanding around the reimbursement for that space rental. It was brought to my attention that there's an understanding that we are reimbursed for that $900,000 for the space rental. So I would like on record some clarity around that, and also what the impact is from administration's standpoint and making the cut for $915,000 specifically to that program. Do you guys want to answer that, or should I go to the next one? Okay.
As it relates to reimbursement, we do not get any reimbursement on any of that, because a couple things. In order for the space at MCC to qualify for reimbursement, even though we have students there, one, we would have to justify the need for capacity, that the district is out of space, and then we can go out and get space. That's the first thing. The other thing is the space that is at MCC would have to be modified to fit the requirement of SED to be eligible for aid, and MCC was not willing to do that. We would have to go in and make those 4 rooms to be exactly like our schools, and that was not going to happen. So those are the 2 main tests that it didn't pass for us to get aid on it. So, but as it relates to the $250,000, that is for our students to eat on campus. MCC has a contract with a company called Sodexo, and that was brought to the board. So when we originally started doing this, we said that we would be able to bring in food. After a while, MCC came back and said because of their agreement with Sodexo, we can't bring any food in. We have to go through Sodexo. So we had to enter into an agreement, not with MCC for the food, but with Sodexo for them to provide the food for us. So again, that is not reimbursable through the lunch program. Now, if we were able to provide the lunch through the lunch program, it would be. The rate for that is like a little bit over $2. When it relates to MCC, they're paying about $8 or so per student. So that's why that amount is so high.
So on that note, Everton, so how does these 2 contracts correlate to students being reduced? I mean, some of the students that were here yesterday were making it seem like they're not going to be able now to take the classes at MCC, or there was going to be a reduction. So how does that correlate?
If I could clarify a little bit, because there are misunderstandings, so this is great to have the opportunity. So when this contract was originally done, we didn't have space at the Wilson Foundation campus. Based on so then we had to lean on the space at MCC to accommodate where we had grown out of foundation. So that I think was what began this extra contract there, because we had students living on that space, if you will. They were getting RCSD courses there and MCC courses there, which was never the original intention. So once foundation had some dip in enrollment and we made some adjustments, we could then bring back early college to use their whole floor again. So we could accommodate the space back in the district and it didn't need to rely on the MCC campus for RCSD and MCC courses. So now it's more to its original state, kind of similar to P-TECH, where if you're eligible full-time, then you can go full-time and then they get reimbursed by the state for the course if they're dual enrolled. And if you're a junior and a senior eligible for that dual enrollment, you can still go. And we will accommodate bringing the students there and creating a safe environment for them. In addition to that, in conversation early on with MCC, they understand that we don't need the space for the students anymore, because those that go will attend the MCC courses, that they'll work with us if we want to have somebody come in and out and off the site to support students. So they think they'll be able to work with us on some place for maybe a staff member to be for students to access in the event that seems appropriate. So it will be back to originally how it was, and part of that is due to the fact that we were able to accommodate early college all on one campus again.
Okay, and then I did want to ask about transportation costs, because I know that we're going to be responsible then in transporting students from Wilson to the campus and back. So what will be the cost for transportation?
I don't know the absolute dollar amount. We can get that. It was currently, they had some shuttles going back and forth this year, and Mike did leave it in his transportation budget, but I don't know the actual number, so I will check on that.
Because I would like to know if that's going to cause a further increase in transportation, because I do have questions around transportation.
We can check on that.
Okay. Restorative practices, I actually will support the 10 positions being reinstated And I do believe that if we end up getting the grant, if we can move the 10 positions under the grant, but then I don't necessarily like to always keep moving positions back and forth that way. I think if we're going to make a commitment as a district to not only restoring the 10 positions and restorative practices, that we make a commitment so that this isn't on the chopping block in the future, because we can't be going back and forth on this. But I did have some concerns to not see special education on here. Primarily, there was an article that came out today, and it was like, the district is not going to fund special education. And I know that we're cutting the cases, and that 7 positions were redesigned and reinstated in relations to cutting the 40 cases. But I did have some conversations, and I saw the draft proposal that was put together. And it's my understanding that it's at minimum going to take 12 positions and not 7. So I would like us to consider funding the exact amount of positions that will potentially be needed to ensure that we can roll out that plan, that draft. I know that it's still in the draft stages and it's not 100%, but to even start it in a deficit when we already are so far down the rabbit hole with special education. And again, it goes back to, what's cheap right now is going to potentially cost us more later. And I don't know what that dollar amount would be, but I do want us to look at, restoring some of these positions and supporting these programs, but also saving what we can save in the fund balance. So it's both for me.
Well, and the reason it wasn't on this chart is because no one spoke at the last meeting about special ed. But we do have them on our list to restore 8 of the positions. I'll see what the need would be. And that was when Commissioner Hallmark said, yes, it's 2.2, but we also have about 3.7 to do all the things you've been talking about, which would still leave about $1 million or $1.5 million to go into our fund balance.
Okay.
Commissioner Davis?
Going back to the return of the early college to the Wilson facility, that is one of the facilities that I did visit and did talk with some of the administrators, and then you saw some of the students. So again, I guess I would like to understand that reduction that you said in enrollment, because it's my understanding when I visited that there isn't sufficient space to it would be disruptive to bring them back to that campus. So I like to understand the difference in perspective.
So to accommodate them on the 3rd floor, which is where they have originally been since they started, other than before, because Foundation was growing out. The overall reduction in enrollment at Foundation led to a reduction of 3 classrooms in the Foundation K through 8 campus. We did not add a pre-K there. And then in addition, we did adjust for 7th grade seats so that they could make the accommodation. And Chief Wilson worked with both principals. Well, particularly around that, it would be an adjustment with Principal of Foundation. And we did that, and we looked across the district to see how we could adjust for seats across the district if indeed the seats were needed. We also looked at the number of families that picked that school, and they have all gotten their first choices as we look at it right now for that school based on request. So therefore, that's how we accommodated for the space. So the reduction in enrollment of 3, no pre-K, preschool is going in that campus right now. They haven't had it. And then in addition, adjusting some of the 7th grade seats to reduce some of the sizes in that grade level. So that adjusted to bring them to the 1st and 2nd floor and then accommodate for the 3rd floor for early college.
Can I? Oh, go ahead.
And the other piece about early college, and again, I love the program. even the thought of expanding and putting a whole high school on a campus. But the kids have to understand they have to earn their way up there. I don't want them on a campus to just take our courses. They have to push themselves so they're ready to take college courses. The other piece is, maturity-wise, we need people up there sort of watching kids, because they can't all be up on campus, have the freedom of being on campus, and then not cutting class and not doing what they're supposed to do. So in this coming year, there's a balance between what students have to do to earn the right to be on campus, take college level courses, and attend attend regularly and all that. And that's the piece that has to be worked out. The other piece is we want MCC to, you know, have their costs met, but not to make a huge profit on us when they're also getting reimbursed on state, and that we'll have to negotiate with them.
So does that mean that the older children and the younger are on the same side of the...
Pardon me?
Are the older children and younger children on the same side? You said the third floor and...
No, the third floor will be early college's floor, if you will.
And the first and second floor will...
Correct. And that was part of the adjustments made.
Yeah, I just have a follow-up to what Commissioner Davis is also asking about. Would it be possible to do a walkthrough on that space, Beth? I just would like to kind of visually see what you guys are talking about, because I think what happens sometimes is that sometimes it's explained one way, and then a year later, when you do a school visit, they're like, you see something completely different, and I just want to make sure that the way that you're describing it is exactly how it's going to happen and what it's going to feel like for those students.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
I'll set that up with you for next week.
I do have one clarification on
Yes.
textbooks. Can I do that while you have the
Yes,
mic?
go ahead.
We did, Dr. Golden and I checked. The Power School, it does not impact textbook inventory. That is handled through another system.
Okay.
So just as an FYI, it is not impacted at all by the new system. Follett Textbook Management System does that, and that's under Dr. Golden's shop. So I just wanted to make sure, but it's not related to Power School.
Okay, so not related to Power School, but the barcode with the new system for textbooks is still a question. It's still going to be an issue, so I want to throw that out there.
I don't think the new, so let me see if I answered this correctly. The Power School system has nothing to do with the barcodes on the
Yep,
textbook.
I got that. Yep, so off of you, but back to Dr. Golden, and, because the barcode system under textbooks.
Oh,
Yeah.
And, and then I also had questions on special education as well. I did read through the implementation plan that was provided, and I just wanted clarity. So how many associate directors and teachers on special assignment will it take in light of the elimination of the cases? Will it take to still be effective?
Yeah, Keisha.
So in the plan, we have that it will take an additional 8. That's outside of what's already put in the budget. But we are looking, and I'm working with the superintendent for some additional staff even beyond that, as we think about some programs and buildings that have special, high number of special needs students and special programs in their special programs in their buildings. I do think that we might have to tweak that number a bit, but to be able to have a centralized CSE to hold all initial eligibilities, reevals, comprehensive reevals, program reviews, MDRs, long and short, and then the annual reviews in the buildings with the embedded support, we will need 26.
In addition
And
to
you'll
those
notice that we tweak, always we go up. We never tweak a number that goes down. And again, we will take a look at all the current employees and see how they're being used. We have a number of assistant principals that we're going to promote to principals and therefore create spots for them.
So the gradual release will start in 1920, where
Yes.
assistant principal will be identified, and we have sufficient persons to work with
Yes.
each of those assistant principals. So the annual reviews will continue to be on time. And congratulations
Yes.
for bringing the annual reviews, overdue reviews down 83%. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. But there's still, so will we be able to continue with that trend
Yes.
with the number of persons that we have?
Absolutely.
Okay.
only
It's all, again, on the same report. So it sounds like we're going to double the number of integrated classes offered in the district. So do we have enough staffing to do that?
Yeah.
Yes, we do. So we've looked at that. We have the staffing. We've expanded our integrated co-taught classrooms in grades 7 through 12, so now we'll offer it grades K through 12. We do have the teachers. We're working on the professional development now in co-teaching, so.
Okay. And the positions that we're talking about, are they all actually filled right now? There's really people that are in there?
Well, for next year.
For next
they
year, like the
are-
associate directors, the teachers on special assignment, they all are actually filled?
We
There's
have
people?
positions, they're not all filled because we have a number of positions that will be open for the 1920 school year.
So we'll work on
But they
filling
will
those
be filled.
to keep it. Okay. And when I was looking at the chart, it said that I saw the chart that there's 154 students who are receiving their program out of the district, and it showed that 110 of them are 7 through 12 and 44 were K through 6. It talked about North Star doing 7 through 12. What's happening with the K through 6? Because the 7 through 12 is getting a social emotional curriculum response something. Are the K through 6 getting a therapeutic program?
So, yes, we are planning to develop a K through 6 therapeutic in-district program in the 1920 school year. So we're still working with the superintendent on where that's going to be and what that's going to look like.
Is that a part of the budget? We have the funding to do it?
For 1920?
For 1920, yes. So it's not listed right now under special education, but it is a part of the budget, is my understanding.
Oh, so that's a definite. Okay.
Dr. Davis, can we give other people a chance to do their questions and you can pick
Oh,
up?
sure. It was just one question, but it had many parts. It's the same
Right.
report.
Did you get through all of the special ed?
I just looking to see if there was one more special ed. And I
It
guess
does
it
make
just-
sense to keep going on the same topic.
Yeah, it's the
but
same topic. I'm not changing
I
topics.
just want to make sure we're not moving on.
And the teachers there's monies for them to receive the professional learning and the toolkits to implement the new curriculum?
So the social emotional learning curriculum?
Right.
Yes, so that part is already in the budget. So we have budgeted for the ability to implement social emotional learning in all 812s and 1211 classrooms across the district. So that's a big initiative. We did implement our cell curriculum, Respect 360, at North Star, 7 through 12 this year, so.
Okay, all right. And so right now, with the plan that we have, it's addressing all the recommendations in the consent decree?
I believe the consent decree isn't official yet, so I've got to say yes so far unless something drastic happens in that decree. Keisha and Carl are both working on it, and you should know within a couple of weeks what at least the draft looks like.
Commissioner Shepherd, is your question special ed related?
Yeah, so I just wanted to throw out there that I thought we were going to get an update in a couple of weeks in regards to what we should be doing as a board moving forward so we can make some decisions. I know that there's special ed addressed in this budget, but it just sounds like this conversation, we're saying stuff is definite and we haven't even had a chance to hear from you all yet. So I just wanted to caution my colleagues on going so deep into this because we still haven't gotten all the information that we are waiting for. So that was my comment.
And the only thing that I've asked Keisha is to try to plan the budget around whatever they're asking, and some of it is money and some of it, quite frankly, isn't. It's compliance with the rules.
Okay. Dr. Aquino?
So mine is not a question, but maybe more a suggestion for the board, in my very, very humble opinion, like, and I'm going to use the restorative practice as an example. So it's not about the restorative practice. That I think what the question should be more not about should we be adding more or suggesting to be adding more, but more asking the administration with what you're suggesting, can we deliver the services that are needed for our student? And I say that because as I've been studying the budget, look, I look for an individual school that will remain nameless that had 406 students. 406 students, has a principal, 2 assistant principal, and in my calculation of the potential class size comes to 15. That's almost the size of a special ed class. So I'm just pointing that out, that nowhere in the nation would you find a school with 406 with 3 administrators. That's the ratio of 100, 1 to 135. And in the presentation you gave us, you know, this district is the lowest in the Big Five, but also in the nation. So I'm just putting it out there. It's like saying, you know, could we deliver, you know, with what we have, and because maybe we're just not working smarter. We're working really hard, but not smarter.
Mm-hmm. If I might react to what you just said, Dr. Aquino, the concept of the restorative practice restorations in particular, the history of that is, of course, that we're only providing it in a limited number of schools, with the idea that we get it right in those schools and then we rotate and we move our staffing funding to schools that don't have it. So until we've been through our entire district and have provided PD in our entire district, I don't think we're ripe or ready for reductions. And that was the origin of my question, not that you know, in other areas, you're exactly right. When we get into the schools, there probably will be conversations about, do we really need 3 assistant principals, or can the job get done with 2? Yeah. But
I totally agree with you. And remember, I said it was not about restorative practices, because you're probably absolutely right. It was just an example. I was just using that as an example because that example triggered my comment, but it was not about restorative practice because there's only, going to be only 8 or 10 positions. So it was not about that. It was about the bigger picture.
Right. Okay, thank you for that contribution. Dr. Hallmark?
Sure. So I want to continue this conversation around special education and link it to, I can't even read that. What number is that?
1.3.
1.3?
1.3.
Yeah, 1.3. So when we did that change with the cases last year, and it didn't work out, and there were a lot of complaints and suggestions, and so this is a redesign, and I know you just handed out the special education report, and I apologize, I've only just begun reading it, and perhaps, you know, the answer to my question is already written out, but I'm just going to ask you to say tonight. Can you summarize for me what the biggest issues were with that redesign, with the loss of the cases, and how your redesign, your new redesign, takes care of those concerns that were raised last year.
Yep. So that's a great question. There are many differences. With the last redesign, the district cut the number of cases and advised the buildings that they would have to select a designee, a principal, or the principal would select a designee to take on the responsibilities of CSE meetings. We had, I think it was 14 cases that were left. Those cases were split up among all of the buildings like in networks, so they would rotate and support schools. The principal or the principal's designee was required to hold CSE meetings that included annual reviews, that included reevaluations, that included our short-term MDRs, program reviews, more restrictive program reviews, the whole gamut. The building principals and or their designee received a CSE chairperson training. It was a training that was about 2 hours. I attended that. I was a director at the time. So the training was about 2 hours. They went through that training. It spoke to the regulations. It was kind of like a CSE chairperson 101, right? So they received that, and then there was a webinar that was an hour long. They had to go through that as well, and it kind of walked them through just some of the compliance pieces as far as the paperwork that needed to be submitted and those things. Once you did those two things, you were then badged to be able to chair meetings. In that design, the principal or their designee could be an administrator. It was preferably an assistant principal, but the principal had the autonomy to choose who they wanted. It could have been an administrator or a teacher. So many schools used a psychologist, other schools used an assistant principal, other schools used several APs or interventionists or teachers on assignment, just anyone. It became overwhelming for staff who were not trained in special education to be able to take on that type of responsibility with a one-day training and a one-day webinar. So we became grossly out of compliance, as you know. So this new redesign, there is a reduction. Well, the cases are being, there's a redesign in the way we're going to chair meetings. So we will have administrators. They will be associate directors of Central CSE, and we will have teachers on special assignment that are special education, with a special education background expertise. So they could have been our special ed administrators, special ed leaders, coaches in the district, and that. So we are developing a central CSE that will take on the responsibility of chairing all initial eligibilities, all reevaluations, all program reviews leading to more restrictive placements, all short-term MDR suspensions, and long-term suspensions. The responsibility of the building will be annual reviews. Annual reviews not leading to more restrictive placements. We are asking that there be an assistant principal who is identified as the liaison to the department and for this work. That person will begin being trained in next month. Originally it was April, so we have it now for May, and the training will go on all the way until next June. So it's a bi-weekly training, just building the capacity of that liaison, that building level administrator. We also are implementing a gradual release model, a gradual release of the responsibilities, because although it's an annual review and we are going to go through training with the assistant principals, we do understand that it's not their, they don't have a background in special education. There is a lot at stake here, and we want to make sure that we get it right. So we are going to have our central staff for annual reviews push into the building and provide that embedded professional learning. So what that means is that for annual reviews, our staff will be the LEA or the chairperson for those meetings. So they will chair the annual review meetings alongside the assistant principal. That assistant principal is to be at all of those meetings from the very beginning. So, we have an anniversary date schedule. Commissioner Davis was talking about earlier, and in that anniversary schedule, we're looking at those first couple of months. The assistant principal is at those annual review meetings, learning the process as far as facilitating an IEP meeting, the areas of the components of the IEP, learning how to work with parents around developing an IEP. They're observing the process alongside the district level LEA or CSE chairperson. The next couple of months, we would imagine or expect that the central staff will still be the chairperson, and that person will gradually start allowing that assistant principal to co-chair meetings with them. Maybe they'll develop the PLEPs, right, or the modifications or the accommodations, or just start developing the IEP alongside that assistant principal. And then maybe the last couple of months, that assistant principal is able to chair the meeting, and of course that central staff is there monitoring, coaching, providing feedback, immediate feedback, and they still are serving as the official LEA. So it's that embedded support that entire year. That next year, we know that there are different levels of capacity in our district and the assistant principals. So we have some assistant principals that have a special ed background. There are quite a few that were special ed administrators. They were TCOSs, a position in the past, or they have just a higher aptitude for that work. So they will be ready to have the responsibility of chairing meetings to be released. They will still receive technical assistance from the department continually throughout that second year. So the department will still implement our quality assurance protocol to just ensure that the IEPs are developed legally compliant, and we stay in compliance. We know that we're also going to have other assistant principals who are not ready. It's brand new. There's a lot going on in their building. They will still need that embedded support. So we have that second year. They'll still get that same level of support. And then that third year, we're calling it the year of sustainability. We are expecting that on that third year, we'll be able to release the responsibility of the annual reviews to the building, while the district is still providing that technical assistance and having those protocols to ensure those meetings are going the way that it's expected. Also, throughout all of this process, the assistant principals and the principal will receive professional learning from the Department of Special Education bi-weekly.
So if I may add, because obviously, as you know, this is an area of interest to me and to the state, and it was in my report, I would summarize the key difference is, in the past, the transfer of responsibility to the school was done in a period of several months. Here, it's going to be done in 3 years.
Yeah, okay.
So it makes a huge difference.
Okay. Thank you for that very detailed answer. It sounds great.
And let me give just a short, remember, our district has labeled 20% of our kids with special needs. It has another 4 or 5% that don't go to our schools but live in our city. So that's 25% of our kids, when we know it should, 12% is the average across the nation. even 16% in an urban area. So we've got to take the step. It's not the case's fault. They didn't do anything wrong. Our design was wrong. And when we centralize this, we'll begin to get the number down. The other number that is really hurting us is that most of the kids that are in special education are in self-contained classes, which again means the odds of them getting a diploma and getting out is a lot lower. So all of this is part of a whole process to change the way we deliver our special education to really about a quarter of our kids.
So I'm also just curious about how this design came about. Did you design this? Did you see this happening, this or something like this in other districts? Just curious about how you got to this redesign.
Yes, so it's a lot of both. I've definitely done this work in another district, and it was done where we did have a central CSE, but also it's been the recommendation in I'm not sure how much I could say, but the subcommittees, that the board special education subcommittee, and it's the recommendation in the Judy Elliott report. It's the recommendation in many reports to centralize CSE. To the superintendent's point, since the time that this district had CSE responsibilities placed back in the building, there was a sharp increase in the number of students that were classified, in the number of students that were placed in more restrictive self-contained settings, and in the number of students who were being suspended because it was deemed that it's not a manifestation of their disability when those meetings are held in the building. So it's many recommendations that that's led us to the decision to move back to a central CSE. The piece about annual reviews, that's come from recommendations really from all over. Our distinguished educator has come from a district that had annual reviews in the central CSE done in the similar way I have. Our superintendent has in Syracuse, I believe. So it's kind of multiple recommendations for it. The gradual release piece was definitely a recommendation, I want to say, from the distinguished educator when we were talking about the process, and I was just concerned about just training and allowing assistant principals to go ahead and do that work. That was that recommendation that I think is awesome, because I was thinking we'll just keep it all centralized, but it was such an excellent recommendation to be able to still allow the buildings to have that responsibility, which is the superintendent's vision, and it's definitely necessary for schools to be able to own all of their students, but it allows the district to ensure that we will stay in compliance and that it'll be done right. So yeah, it was a lot of hats that helped with this.
And this is not just about special needs kids. This will work with all kids, because the gen ed teachers are going to have to approach it differently, and so will the special need teachers. There's no question about it, and this is, as hard as it is just the smallest part of this whole training.
Thank you. I feel hopeful.
Thank you. President White?
A couple things. Dan, real quickly, what is the cost to restore those additional 2 restorative practice employees? Do you know?
I don't know if we know exactly. I would guess it's probably in the neighborhood of another 200,000, including benefits and everything. So we'd be around 800,000 instead of the 500.
And I ask, of course, because to determine whether I would support the restoration of the restorative practice workers, I think it's important that you begin with what that's going to cost. But again, using the phrase "pay me now or pay me later," as I indicated before, I think it's a wise investment of $200,000. That will be $200,000 less that we'll put into our cookie jar. But again, If we don't do that, I think it's going to come out of somebody else's cookie jar, and that cookie jar is going to be the taxpayer cookie jar. Second point is I appreciate Reverend Davis's inquiries about special ed and the specific questions that she was asking. And I also appreciate Commissioner Shepard's comment that we don't want to get too far ahead. And she said that before Keisha gave some additional details. But we haven't had the full agreement, consent decree presented to us. So we shouldn't get too out ahead of it. But in the spirit of Commissioner Davis's remarks, I think it is important that we ask direct questions about what is going to be funded. Are we going to be able to make the commitments that we told Empire Justice and others through Commissioner Funchess that we would keep? And in that regard, I'm notorious for trying to read people's body language. I want to be very clear about this. When we ask those questions, and I know you guys' boss is sitting right next to you, right? I think I know Dan well enough to know he expects honest answers. Absolutely. And he's not looking to look back at you and say, oh, don't tell them the truth. And so I pride myself on my ability to read people's body language. If somebody asks you a question from this side of the table, give them an honest answer. Do not, I'm reading body language now. I'm just telling you, if we ask you a question and you're concerned about what your boss would say, if it's not maybe what you've talked about or you think that he might not want you to say that, I think I know Dan pretty well enough to know he's not going to hold it against anybody. I think is that right, Dan?
Yes, but in fairness, I think there's still some negotiation going on. And,
absolutely.
And unfortunately, every time we get here, the number goes up. So that's why somebody may be...
I get that, okay. But I just want to be clear. That's not what I saw.
No, okay.
Right? I get the fact I'm a lawyer. I see negotiation faces. You know, you don't want to... That's not what I saw today. Okay. I want people, and I know you would want people to be very comfortable. So long as you're not, Steve would be upset about you giving away the bank in negotiations. But if someone asks you a question, anybody asks you a question, please be upfront. And by the way, if you're concerned about what your boss might say, you all are smart enough to talk to your boss in advance and say, hey, listen, and I know people in this room who will tell me they have spoken to their superiors and told them what their thought is. I would hope that you could work it out in advance so that you could offer honest, straightforward information when we ask questions. I don't want anybody to think, oh my God, if I say that, will Dan be upset at me? I don't think he's that kind of person, and you need to be straightforward.
I'm not, and to be honest with you, nobody agrees with me that it's sitting up here anyhow, so and they're not afraid to say it. But
that doesn't surprise me.
And the other reason why I say that is, it really, once again, thematically, it becomes a pay me now or pay me later. People talk about, well, what about the district dollar? Somebody's going to pay for our lack of courage or our reluctance to talk about the facts. Somebody's going to pay for it at some point. It may not be us, but it will be most certainly the taxpayer. Number 5,
Can I say
yes.
One comment, sorry, President White. I've seen the executive cabinet disagree with the superintendent. So I think they're very comfortable with Superintendent Lowen.
They're all wrong, but they're very comfortable saying.
All right, I just, again, I want to be certain on that. I don't want personally to ask a question for which I do not believe I've gotten the right answer, the honest answer. So I just want to be clear about that. This is an executive cabinet. This is a different dynamic. You got board members asking questions and supervisors sitting there. I just want to make sure on these critical issues, who quite literally, I think I heard somebody say earlier today, these are life-altering changes. And these are critical questions. And the dynamic that's working here is the board is asking the superintendent or his designee about a certain question. And I realize in that human dynamic, people might be reluctant, but I'm saying to you, because these questions are so important, that I want you to be as straightforward as possible. I'm almost done, Commissioner Powell. Dan, I would like to talk to you about, offline, about issues raised about the lunch, the cost of lunch and space. Many of you know, including Linda, actually, I think the project began under Bohan, but Linda was here. We literally went and inspected space, and we talked contract and costs, some of the things that you talked about. It's just a shame. I get the fact that, and I was here, Beth, when we were told there wasn't enough space at the foundation, and it was just totally ruining the principal's approach. And now we're hearing that that's not the case. Without regard to that issue, I would remind you, and I think, Dan, you almost alluded to it, there are examples of best practice where students are on college campuses. Absolutely. So I get the fact that, you know, maybe there's space now, but I would think we would be making a decision on what is best for our students. Right. I know cost is a factor, but you could see in the results and in the students' voices the other night that approach really works well. So again, I'll backtrack with you about this lunch and space conversations, because again, we were talking to Ann Crest a few years ago. We were wearing hard hats and walking around looking at that space with Mike Smith, and at that time he was talking about creative ways to finance that. So I would like to see how that goes. And then let's see, extended learning time. That's referenced in this chart extensively. I know we had some studies about whether it works or not prior to your time here. I think even prior to when you were here, Linda, there were some studies done on extended learning. I would like to know offline at another time whether that works. And then going over to the fourth column, when you talk about reduction in those support services over at, it looks like number 17 school. You don't have to answer this now. Have we talked to number 17? Are we doing this just because we can save money? Are those agencies, including the ones above that, where you talk about eliminating those funds for Quad A, reduction in Center for Youth Services, Generation 2, TS, AmeriCorps, Ibero, Center for Youth Services, Gandhi? Are we, you don't have to answer this now, are we eliminating them because we're not getting a return on investment? Are we eliminating them because we just don't have the money? And again, I go back to my thesis for today. Either pay me now or pay me later. It's not mutually exclusive approaches, but we have to do what is best for children and balance our responsibilities as fiduciary agents. So at another time, I would like to know whether we're reducing those because we gotta save money, because sometimes when you gotta save money, at the same time you gotta save kids. And if these programs are working, I think we have to figure out why I wanna understand why we're eliminating them. Can you at least tell me generally, are we eliminating because we don't get value for our dollar, or because we're trying to save money?
No, it's a combination of both, where grants have run out and we have to put it on our A budget and we don't have the funding there. But again, that's why we put an additional $1.5 million in to keep both community schools and extended learning time. Extended learning time works when the administrator and the staff want it to work. There are a couple of schools that don't want to spend that time. I ultimately think kids need the wraparound services from early morning till evening, but we've got to find willing participants, otherwise it's wasting money.
Thank you.
Circling back to early college one last time, although you're not talking about restoring funding, you haven't described a situation where all children will be leaving the MCC campus, and I support that hybrid. As a mom of a kid who went to early college, I can tell you that leaving the high school campus and spending time on the college campus she was not ready for that, even as a junior when she was taking college level courses. So a hybrid strikes me as the right answer, and you know, adults that are familiar with the early college program need to be gatekeepers and make the assessment whether a student's ready for that or not.
Exactly.
My last question is about school nurses. Historically, we get restored funding above the governor's budget for school nursing, and I haven't heard one word about that this time. I was away when the budget was approved or passed. So can you talk to me about what happened in the governor's budget around school nurses? Did we not get any additional funding?
I haven't seen it, and I can go back again and look and rifle through that to see if it's
Okay.
there.
And if we didn't, I don't think it's too late. I think we should keep on advocating for a single issue bill to restore funding. It's been many years since we've begun getting special funding from the state, and we've been able to get full funding every year in the past. So, and it's a small piece for this, it's a small lift for the state. Okay, so in an effort to kind of channel our discussion, if there are any other questions about these changes in the next round, this is your last shot at asking them. If you don't have a question about these changes, I would ask you to focus on the answers given in the book and advise us whether the answers you received are complete or whether you need to do a follow-up question around the answers already provided. Okay?
I just want to provide clarity on this. Dan, you had sort of asked us where the board was at with the restoration of the restorative practice to 10. I support that. I just want to be clear on that. Okay. And I think a couple of other people have mentioned that as well.
Yeah, hopefully they've been keeping a tally themselves.
How many were at 8, but never mind.
We're going to have an auctioneer here in a minute. So going back to the other end of the table, again, if there are any other questions on the new information, certainly get those out. If not, if your question was answered but not to your satisfaction, please ask for clarification. And then if that's not your case, then feel free to ask new questions in this next round. Commissioner Shepard?
Okay, well, I have questions. I'm going to start in
Did she pass?
section.
I'm sorry?
She said she's good.
Okay, I didn't hear that. Thank you.
Yes. So I'm going to start at section 2. So just a few things in section 2. I have section 3, and that's the majority of my questions are kind of focused in section 2 and 3. So I'll go by section and page number, just for clarity purposes.
Okay. And keep in mind, we're going to ask one question at a time and then keep coming back down the line, okay?
I would prefer to ask my questions for section 2.
I would prefer that everyone get a
Well,
chance.
we didn't agree to this, so if you
Excuse
guys
me.
change the format this year, that has to be a full board decision, not one commissioner.
This
So
is how we
section
have
2, page
always-
8, in the last paragraph,
Excuse me. We have always done it this way.
she's not the chair
I
of.
am the chair.
There are no committees currently, and that's actually what I want to bring to the
I'm going to ask
front.
the president to take
Wait,
over this
wait
meeting.
a second. That won't be necessary, because I did, at the very beginning of the meeting, I said, I'm handing the gavel over to Commissioner Powell. She is chairing the meeting. It is appropriate board protocol for her to line up the presentation and the balance of the meeting the way she wants to. And I would just say, just for the record, we have done it this way in the past. We go through one person, we work our way down. We go one person, we work our way down. So I always work this way, and it's always, this is what we've always done. It's always been the prerogative of the chair to run the meeting. Let her run the meeting. You'll certainly be allowed to ask whatever questions you want to ask. She's not going to limit the number of questions. She's just choosing to do it in that fashion. And that's appropriate. We've done it that way before.
You've done it because we've had chairs, but we don't have a current, we don't have chairs.
She's chairing the meeting. She's chairing the meeting.
Okay, but you made that decision, you.
That's right.
One person, not the full board,
Well,
and that's
listen,
the problem that I have too. But go ahead, Van, go ahead, keep going.
The board chair is chairing the meeting. He can, or she, can hand the gavel over to whoever she deems appropriate. It's not a complicated thing. I can appreciate the fact that you might want to ask all the questions at one time. I'm not saying that's irrational or inappropriate, but the chair has chosen to do it a different way, a way by which we've done it multiple times in the past. So just all that we're asking as a body is that you respect the chair, that's all. And that's the way she's chosen to do it. And I think it's appropriate.
And if I may add, the reason that we do this is so that all board members stay engaged and don't glaze over and feel like they don't have to listen because it's not their question, and then 20 minutes go by and they're not engaged anymore, okay? This allows us all to stay alert and awake and engaged. So please, ask your first question.
So, in section 2, page 8, in the last paragraph, it states that all budgets go through the Finance Committee and then cites policy resolutions. However, we currently do not have a committee structure as it was suspended, and that should be noted to the public, and the time frame that it was put on hold, and also the resolution should be cited in there with the other resolutions. That was the first statement I'll make in that section, since we're doing it one by one.
Okay, Commissioner Davis?
I had a different question, and I just want to share my opinion too. That you said not to gloss over. I kind of gloss over when we change subject to subject. So I kind of like having a person stay with the section if it's all the questions are the same. But I understand that a different process has been put into place. So I'm changing the subject to, I know that the district, I believe there's an understanding that there's 75 languages, but most of the materials, they say they come in English or Spanish. So I just want to understand budget-wise, what services exactly do we provide to persons other than Spanish so that parents, students, et cetera, caregivers are getting information timely? They can look on our website and find, they can call, and there's someone who can talk with them. What do we provide for persons other than Spanish?
Commissioner, it would probably be better to give you an in-depth response in writing, because there are several services that we engage to provide for families that do not speak Spanish or English, but we do provide other translation services, technologically, et cetera. Okay, so I will provide that. I think we already have it written.
And that was also particular to the special education and all that. And all that's in the budget. I was also talking about.
Budget, right?
What is that?
You were referring specifically also to the budget.
Yeah, I was specifically wondering that we have enough in the budget to cover making sure that other persons are able to access everything in their own language.
We have to, because by law, there are certain stipulations when there are so many students at a grade level, you have to make sure that those services are provided. So we have to have funding for those. So we'll include all of that. Is there anything you wanted me to add, Jaime? Were you saying something? Okay.
Okay. Dr. Aquino, do you have a question?
Thank you.
Commissioner Hallmark?
Sure. So I had a question under the red tab, round 1, 111. According to the report, investing in student success, talking about the ratios and our ratios compared to other districts. Yeah, that one. So it's a question I keep asking myself. Okay, so you can sort of compare all districts and look at ratios, but you also have to look at the subgroups within districts, because districts have different subgroups of students: English language learners, students with disabilities, homeless students, and level of trauma, social emotional needs. And so when you talk about lowest instructional student ratio, first of all, I just want to sort of dive into it. Instructional ratio, are you including counselors, restorative practice, or are you just looking at teachers, okay? Or are you looking at staff when you use the word instructional? And are we comparing these numbers fairly, looking at our subgroups? Given, like, say, reading teachers, our students may need more reading teachers, even though the numbers might be similar. I mean, I'm just, do you understand my question? Thank you.
And these are global numbers from on high.
National.
But when you compare them within New York State and urban areas only, and particularly Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, Utica, upstate, our ratio is still the lowest in each one. And again, it isn't saying that we're trying to be the highest, but if we move a little bit from 11 to 13, that would be a huge difference in our budget. We're not talking about moving 11 to 17 or 18 where some of the Yonkers is or something like that.
So that's helpful to hear that we're looking at numbers compared to, like, say, the other big five, or I don't want to be compared to White Plains or whatever. So,
or our suburban neighbors.
Right, exactly. So, and then just taking into the account just these other things. So are we talking about all staff or just teachers? Are we looking at counselors? Are we talking?
We look at it both ways.
Okay.
We look at it classroom teachers only and then support staff. And again, the change we're talking about is only up 1 or 2 kids per whichever category. So we're not trying to win a medal for having the least amount of staff.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I would make a comment about this particular process. I want to thank our staff, board staff in particular, and board members for submitting these questions. Lots of good, comprehensive questions, and I also want to thank the administration for providing some really some answers that have that are really clear and succinct, and I appreciate that as well. But I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay. Now, this is for consideration for not this round, but rounds to come. We do have Carlene from East High School to speak to the East High budget. So be ready to ask her, and at some point, when I see the questions are petering out, I'm going to ask her to come up and speak to the East High budget, okay? Commissioner Shepard? No questions, thank you. Commissioner LeBron?
All right, section 2, page 9. Oh, hold on, I gotta turn on my mic. Section 2, page 9, which is talking about enrollments. There we go, that page right there. So last year's enrollment numbers were inflated and reflected enrollments that were not accurate. So I went back to last year's budget and the numbers that we were presented for both actual enrollment and projected, and the enrollment trends, that the trend reflected a decline in student enrollment. That's been like historically where this district has been showing the enrollment piece was a decline. But for whatever reason, last year it was predicted that last year and this year we would have a growth. Now I understand that Hurricane Maria had an impact, and somehow that translated into it was going to reverse the trend of this dramatic decrease that we've been experiencing, but it didn't. But what was presented both to the commissioners and to the public, that our actual enrollment was 27,056 students, when in actuality, this year's budget presented that we had 25,798 students. So there was some difference of 1,258 students, and I kind of wanted to know where those numbers came from and where did those students go? Oh, and I also want to put in there, I'm sorry, one last thing, that in addition that charter students were presented at a lower enrollment at 5,972. And although this year it's saying that the increase was to 6,118, it still is some difference of 140, so it still leaves a good chunk of students that are unaccounted for. Just kind of want to understand that.
So I can give a high level and then add more detail. I'm writing if you want, Commissioner. But yes, it was a 27-0-1156. And it was based on the bilingual language. We expanded the Bilingual Language Academy to accommodate what we thought were more students coming in from Puerto Rico. That did happen. When we approached it this year, and after doing the structural deficit report, it was clear we needed to address the district footprint. So that is one of the first things we did in the fall, was begin to address that very issue, make sure that we knew, and we have known, which charter schools are, well, one closed after we've accommodated, what ones are opening. So it ended up being around 6,000. I don't have the other chart in front of me.
6,118.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it.
So that with then the actual enrollment, the growth that we anticipated to occur did not occur. So we knew then that we had to address that for this budget year, which we had stated during the structural deficit report. So that's what we did. So knowing that, so that's the answer to the enrollment. But also knowing that, we said, how are we going to land on that enrollment number? Because I think that's an important question, and that came up in here. So we brought in, and I know there's a more detailed technical explanation, but overall, demographics, accountability, and budget using a established formula for enrollment, established that number, agreed to the number, so we didn't have, for example, demographics or FMP, we all had to work on the same number and be consistent with that. So that is how then we adjusted for classes at the building level in sections based on the adjusted enrollment.
But where did that number of students go? So you're saying that when you presented enrollment last year, that was a projection and not an actual enrollment?
It's always a projection. And the projection, because we went back, that's one of the first things, like I said, we did in the fall.
For me, that feels like a huge projection of 1,258 students, with the actuality being 25,798 students.
So upon my investigation, I'm giving you my best answer, that it was the anticipated growth from the students that would be coming from Puerto Rico based on some of the community input we were getting. And it did not obviously come out to be that. And even so, we're still trying to make sure we've anticipated the correct enrollment, because it is slowly declining. So we are looking, even as the lottery is coming in, how many kids are coming in through the lottery, to begin to make sure we're monitoring the enrollment right now for next year. To make sure no further adjustments need to be made. But that's what we found when we looked at the enrollment in the fall.
And can I just have a follow-up to Everton on that? Everton, I went back and I think I have it with me, but I reprinted the CAFR. Because when the CAFR was presented, it was presented that our actual enrollment was at 27,000. And so I had a question about that entire report, and if we were using that number of students for the enrollment to talk about our budget for the year off of a 27,000 enrollment, when in fact we have 25,000.
Right. So when the budget happened last year, the number that we used was the 27,000, and the budget was created based upon the 27,000. Staffing in the schools were based upon that number. But as we went through this year and we started, I wouldn't say truing up, starting looking at the numbers, that's when we realized that the actual numbers were not the 27.
So does that mean that the CAFR that came out in December 2018 with an enrollment of 27,000, that budget in there then is probably not correct, because it reflected 27,000 students, but we have 25.
Right, but the budget that was prepared and the dollars that were put in was based upon 27,000 students. So when we staffed the schools, it was staffed based upon that. So as we go through the gap elimination report, we realized that there were some FTEs in the buildings that we needed to pull out. And if you remember in some of the numbers that we saw, how we were going to take out some of those numbers. So we started actually truing up some of those numbers since November and December, and that's when we pulled out some of the FTEs. So the number one that we budgeted for this year was actually 27,056. So if you go through and look at each of the enrollment number for each school and add them up, it comes to that. But as we started looking at the numbers, we realized that there were excess staffing in the schools, and we have been reducing those to PMAFs since November when we started doing the project. So when we did the CAFR, remember the CAFR was as of the end of last year, and that was the number that we have. So if we had changed the number that we had, then there would have been a misalignment of the numbers that we staffed the school with based upon what the dollars are and what the enrollment number would be.
Right, but doesn't that also impact our revenue and our expenditures?
Our actual numbers affect our revenue.
Right.
So when we reported the numbers to the state for last year, that's what's affecting, when I say last year, 2017-18, that's what's affecting our revenue for 2018-19. So when we make the report the numbers that we reported through Beds Day on October 5th, that's what's going to be impacting our revenue for the coming year, the 1920. So those numbers that we reported is actually saying the 25. And that's when we realized that there is a misalignment of the actual numbers to what we budgeted for. So as we were going through, we realized that we had to start pulling out staff. So many of the FTEs, through the chiefs, they went through and started looking at reducing some of the FTEs in the school.
Yeah, I have questions on FTEs, but we'll get there.
Okay, Commissioner Davis?
I just want to clarify my question from before. It's my understanding that the parents and community should have some type of presentation that they can, that's less dense than all that we have here, and also that it should be provided in languages, I guess, more than Spanish.
Yes.
How exactly does the community and the parents, also talking about those of other languages than English or Spanish, when does the community understand how these cuts impact where their kids go to school? Because if we're going to have another public hearing next week, how is that going to happen between now and next week? When exactly do parents and community understand fully the impact of the cuts where their kids go to school, and then they can come and say something and share something?
So one of the things we're doing that we mentioned when we did the budget presentation is to take the budget book and take it down to a sizable amount. And one of our challenge now is what's sizable. So we're trying to put it in such a way that we only have one page for each school. And like in section 6, where basically section 6 is taking all of central office, our non-schools, and break it up into department by department. One of the things we have been talking about is if we could just put a document together for central office as a whole, that would give us maybe about 4 to 5 pages rather than it being every single department that we have in section 6. So we have been trying to narrow it down, but it's very challenging as to what do you put in and what you don't. But the main piece that we want to make sure that we get to is the schools part, because that's what many of the community members are interested in. So as we look at the school part, we want to just give them a one-pager that they can understand what the school looks like. And that's why when President White asked about when we can get this, we're actually working on a one-pager for each of the school where it has all the information for the school. It has the accountability information right there. So that would be about maybe 56 pages as it relates to schools and program. And then like for central office, if we have 4 pages and trying to summarize that. So that's what we're doing now. That's why we said next week, because we actually are doing it as we speak.
And then the other languages, how do they?
The other languages, you know, we always use communication to translate it in English, in Spanish, but we'll use them as well, but I don't know the languages that they have. But we always work with the communication department, and they would translate them in different languages.
Is this a follow-on question, Commissioner Shepherd, please?
So in regards to the languages, I brought that up last budget season, and I think that it was adjusted where there is a number, there is information on our website that you call, and then you let them know what language you need stuff translated in. But to Commissioner Davis' point this year, if that can be added to this budgetary process, so we make sure that that information is in the forefront. But I did want to follow up in regards to, for me, because all my questions are based on schools, so I am following the flow of discussion, so I'm going to wait till the next deliberation meeting. Mm-hmm. But I did want to throw out there, because Everton, you just spoke about breaking it down to one-pagers. For me, it's more so of not necessarily the size of the page, but what's actually going on there, like the content. So not just throwing charts on there that the community may not understand, but actually putting it in a way that is digestible for someone who doesn't do this in their everyday work. And I do have some suggestions around that, and I can send those over through email just to cut this conversation short. But I really want us to make sure, and I don't know if that's something for us as a board to communicate, or if it would be simpler to have it in writing so that whoever wants to pick it up can do that. But it's really about how it's being translated on that page is important for me.
And just one last piece. So if I'm the caregiver and my child's in a school, looking at the sheet and seeing 2 FTEs are gone or et cetera, it doesn't tell me if my child, whose teacher Davis has been very effective with, it doesn't tell me that she's leaving. So does it get to that kind of understanding that parents understand who might not be there next year?
No, because we have a process in place for transfer day. So the teachers that may be there now, they might not be there tomorrow.
Oh, so everyone knows that already.
Whether it be a person retire or a person choose to transfer to another building. So making an assessment on the projection would be very challenging. The only time we can really know that is when we get to maybe around September, when the dust settles and we know where everyone is. And that's one of the reasons why we can't really budget on actual salaries, because the salaries that you put in today, those people may not be there tomorrow. So it's very challenging to do it. A smaller district where you have 5 teachers, you know you're going to have the 5 teachers. But when you talk about 3,600, 3,700 teaching staff, you don't know who is going to end up where. So that's why the challenge is budgeting actual versus average salary. And in the end of September to October is when we go in after the dust has settled and we true up all the numbers. So after September, we usually come to the board and say we need to do an amendment because now we know where everybody is. And then we can do an amendment to true up everything. But prior to that, we don't know where people are going to end up.
I just want to also add to kind of how the parents would also know. So prior to us even having our first budget hearing, administration did hold some community parent forums to to go over the fact of where our budget was at, that we were going to have cuts, why we were having cuts, and what some of the potential cuts would look like. I think that's why some folks did start writing to us about the restorative justice, because that was presented a little bit there. It was touched upon a little bit there. But I know that you guys were at School 16 and at Montessori, and I think you did 3 and one here.
We did one here with the bilingual community.
Yeah.
And that was
I didn't realize.
So, but that was prior to the budget hearing. Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Aquino?
No, I'm good.
Dr. Hallmark? Sorry.
I think it's my last question.
I'm sorry?
This is my last question.
Okay.
So 1.31, regarding transportation. So the question was, what are the core reasons for contract transportation cost increases? And then there's about 5 different ideas here about what the district must become. It's all aspirational. So my question is, maybe this is for the next superintendent, really, to answer. So things were said like students should attend schools closer to where they're living, even if they move, or we should not do door-to-door, do corner stops, or monitor out-of-district transportation. First of all, I didn't know, maybe I'd like a little explanation about that one. That's one part of my question. The other is, what are the things that get in the way of doing the corner-to-corner, having students attend the school closest, and this district transportation? Why is that such a tough nut to crack?
Because of the Board of Education? No. It is partly our philosophy, and really our philosophy has become something that costs us about $80 million a year, which is twice what Syracuse is, even Buffalo and all that. So at some point, we need to have a discussion about this whole idea of, you know, either choice or neighborhood school, and even once we make that choice, it'll take us years to get back, because you don't want to just have 25,000 kids switch schools. But it is a discussion that we have to have. Not so much on money, because the state reimburses us about 90%, but really in terms of time on the bus, parents being engaged with the school, those are the kind of tough discussions that you'll have to have, and we'll get the facts. But we really transport everybody anywhere. And again, you know, safety's an issue for us, the convenience and all that. So it's complex, and I'd love to do it sort of after the budget, because it doesn't, right now, it doesn't impact the budget as much as it does kids' lives about how much time they spend, and parent choice. I mean, they're you know, we've been pretty good with parents about that.
So the board needs to be unified and clear and make a decision about this.
That's a brilliant idea. But okay.
And just to, so one, and Commissioner Powell will know this, in the governor's budget for the past 2 years, he has been targeting transportation costs. Last year, he tried to cap it at 2%, and we got it overturned. This year, what he tried to do is to combine 11 reimbursable aid, and transportation was one of those, because I think he wants to get a handle on transportation, because you can't change the reimbursement rate, so what he does is go about it another way. So I think as long as he's governor, he's going to be coming after transportation, and we're going to see that happen every year, because it costs going up. That's what it is.
If I could pick up on the point you just made, Commissioner Hallmark, the board does need to be unified on this, and there has been some disunity. There's one board member in particular who would like to see every child bused to their school, even if they live in the same block. So that lack of unity. It does sort of immobilize the administration, but there's also the policy itself is not being adhered to. As you said yourself, Dr. Longard, any parent can go to transportation and argue a case for a safety, that they need a bus for safety reasons. And individuals in this institution are human, and they cave into that pressure, especially if they believe there's a board member, singular, who might be prepared to pick up a phone and exert influence, shall we say.
But we've spent so much money looking at the possibility of busing every child but to their neighborhood school would be a possibility, and I'm not convinced it would cost us any more more money. In fact, it might even reduce some of it,
Right.
save time,
I
get
think so, too.
parents more involved. So
Yeah.
I'd like at a
Exactly.
later time to present that and have us discuss it.
That's great.
I'm looking forward to that too, and even if it means taking some of the issues piecemeal, like having a single conversation about whether citywide draw schools should become zone-wide draw schools, and just make that the whole topic of conversation, whether we should put a hard stop on cross-zone busing, which has to be supported by the way we do special education and bilingual education. Otherwise, that doesn't work.
The transportation is the holy grail of the school district, unfortunately, and
You mean the
and
sacred
we've got to
cow?
look, well, sacred cow or whatever, but it would be the major change. I mean, for extended day community schools, parent involvement, and we'd have to phase it in because we wouldn't yank kids out of their school. But if we had a long-term plan, and even to the point where we said, we'll bus everybody that's 2 blocks away or whatever, I think you could run buses north, south, east, west and figure out a way similar to New York City, but on a much smaller scale, that kids would get on the bus and just go where they're going.
So the last little bit was, we should monitor out-of-district transportation that's grown significantly. Can you explain what that is? How that works? Why is it growing, and how
Mike
does
is
that-
really the best one, and we'll write that up and
Okay, that's fine.
send that to you.
Thank you.
Good.
Okay. Going back down to the other end of the table, and keep in mind, right after this round, I'll ask Carlene to come up, and we'll transition to East High. Commissioner Shepard? No? Commissioner LeBron?
Is East High listed in section 1 through 3?
Well, there were questions submitted. You'll find them behind the white tab.
So, okay, can I just, so one, I don't have that book, but two, I do have a clarifying question then about this process. My understanding was that we were to submit questions for the sections that the staff would be presenting. So my understanding is we're talking about sections 1 through 3. We've talked about many things outside of section 1 through 3 today, but I thought that this process, and this is what I recall from last year, was that we would be submitting questions specifically from sections 1 through 3. I don't know that East High School, I don't necessarily want to see this book. I don't understand where East High School from section 1 through 3 falls in. And two, is that not the process? Did the process change? Because that was the process last year. That was the process that was communicated in writing from board staff. So can I ask that question first so that I know what the process is?
So the questions that are here for round 1 questions, as it says right on the top of the page, were sections 1, 2, and 3 for East and superintendent's budget presentation. That's what generated the questions. That's what generated approximately 7, 8 questions for East High. So if the individuals who submitted these questions are satisfied with the answer, then we don't have to call Carlene before us.
No, I hear what you're saying, Willow, but what I'm asking you is the process was, my understanding, that we would be discussing sections 1 through 3. I think people submitted lots of questions that were outside of section 1 through 3. It's not my place, but my understanding, and Kali is here, and you can feel free to speak up because you sent the email, that the process was we were going to be discussing sections 1 through 3 and submit questions for that, then 4, 5, 6, and then and 7, and then section 8 and 9 and 10 would be the last deliberations.
So maybe this will shed a little light. The fact that section 3 is a budget overview tends to generate questions that do wander into the territory of specific operations and the like. It's just an inevitability that when you talk about the budget summary, revenues and expenses, you do inevitably get some questions that wander into areas covered later in the book. If Vern Connors were here, he would point to section and page, and that would be his answer to those peripheral questions. But these are the questions that were submitted. That's my process. I'm giving everyone an opportunity to seek clarification from questions already asked and what's in sections 1, 2, and 3.
Go ahead, Henry.
I think I understand where Commissioner LeBron is coming because Section 7 is dedicated to East
Right.
High School. So I know there were questions for East, so I too would have expected that those questions for East would have been done when we review Section 7. I think that's what I understand.
Right.
I think what I understand from Commissioner LeBron is more clarity on the process that perhaps at the beginning that we could have all been on the same page, because I understand where she's coming from.
Okay, but I do see that Carleen has taken the trouble to be here, and there is a 4-page response submission from East High on questions that were submitted in writing, so.
Okay, well, my questions are going to stick with section 3 to page 4. There's 2 questions for that page and section. So in the legal awards and settlement section, I had a question about why the $400,000 settlement that we received from the food services company, if that would not, why that wasn't listed there as revenue. And then also, what is meant by other local sources in this section? Did we lose state source grants, one-time grants, grant, and special aid, and if so, why? And that's actually section 3, page 5, which is the next one over. 1, 2, 3, 4, or about 4 or 5 lines down where it says other state source grants. So it looks like we did lose money in those areas, and I wanted to have some clarity as to why.
So let me start with the last question first. So if you go to page 13 of section 3.
What page?
Page 13. Because in supporting each of the grant item, we've listed the grants that we have for current year, and then whether our grant is going away or not. So there are several little grants that we've gotten from time to time, like a Bosch grant we'll get for like $7,000. We have the Greater Rochester Health Foundation, which is about that's like $671,000. So those are grants like within Rochester, basically. So, you have the federal grant, you have the state grant, but then you have all these other grants that we have gotten from time to time, and that's where we talk about other local grants.
Okay.
So if you look on that page, some of those grants are going away, and many of those grants are competitive grants. So every year we apply for them. Sometimes we get them, sometimes we don't. Sometimes the amount that we get changes based upon the funder. Depending on how many people apply for them, they may give you half of what you used to get because more applicants. So those are the local grants there. So we try to list them here to see which one is being reduced, which one is going away. Greater Rochester Health Foundation, we usually get about the $600,000, but because it's a competitive grant, there are times where that number is fluctuating, but we are always guaranteed about $300,000. So as we apply for it, based on how many districts and who apply, we may get $500,000, but it's not prudent for us to put the amount that we usually get, and then when we don't get it, then we have a problem.
Okay. All right, and then on section 3, page 4, like the settlement that we received for $400,000 from the food services company, why wouldn't it be listed under legal awards and settlements?
And as and that was one of the questions that came in afterwards, in one of your questions. Mm-hmm. So we were researching that, but off the top of my head is the timing of that because when we're doing the budget, we have to take a snapshot at the budget at a point in time if we're going to present that. And I think what we're doing is we're going to carry that to the board as an amendment to put it in the budget. We really don't put things in the budget until the board approves it.
We did. We voted on that already.
Right, but when we took the snapshot, our snapshot was usually about January, February.
Okay.
So that timing is off. So what we're going to be doing when we talk about the amendment, we're going to go back and look at the number for the new amendment to put it in the final budget book. So it will be included when we do the final budget book.
Okay.
And I think there was one other question.
No, not for section 3 and page 5. I have other section 3 questions, but I'll wait the next round.
Commissioner Davis? Commissioner Queen? Commissioner Hallmark? Why do I keep doing that? No?
I was just going to mention with respect to the reference to East and the EPO, I think what might have happened was that, for example, Section 3 talks about the district's overall budget. Like, for example, if you look at Section 3, page 3, it says the overall revenue summary is $924 million. And that obviously includes East. East is included in that. So I think that the thought might have, I'm not the person who submitted the questions about East, but I think the thought might have been, well, this is part of the overall budget of the district. But no harm, no foul. I mean, as Commissioner LeBron and others have pointed out, Section 7 is dedicated to that. Commissioner LeBron, I heard you say you hadn't prepared for that today. And again, you'll have plenty of opportunity to discuss it when we get to Section 7. So I think we're in good shape. I just think that somebody was looking at the overall budget and thought that East was a part of it and wanted to address it. And I'm sure our folks at East were prepared to come back when we discussed Section 7. So I think we're in good shape. I'm good.
Okay. Commissioner Shepard? Good. Commissioner LeBron?
Yep. Section 3, page 21. Cash capital. Let's go there. Okay, so FTEs. So I know that you roughly mentioned it, and this is probably pertaining to the second question I had from Section 2, page 9. But these numbers, when I went and looked at last year's numbers, let me just tell you what I found. So in 2017-18, we listed that we had 6,315.6 FTEs, yet we're listing them this year at 6,394.41. That's a difference of 78.81. Adopted in the 2019 budget, listed FTEs last year at 6,501.32, but this year at 6,510.67, and the amended budget listed at 65,309.45. So I wanted to know where these numbers all came from, because they're vastly different. Why are there discrepancies in the number of FTEs? Who's responsible for generating these numbers? Did the board approve these hires? Because I kind of feel like, I don't know, we saw these hires throughout the year, or if there was just discrepancies with the numbers. And if the board did approve these hires through resolutions last year, was the board made aware with a clear understanding that these increases were not reflected accurately or part of the approved budget?
Okay, so page 21. So when we adopted the budget for 2018-19, we have the number that we have, the 6510. As we go through the year, there are numbers, positions that are added. On a quarterly basis, when we do our financial, we provide the board with a listing of all the new positions that are in the financial report. We also put in the board library a detailed listing of all the positions that has changed. So we present that. And that as a result of, there are times where a grant may come on board and we have added FTEs. This doesn't necessarily mean that bodies get into the positions. Because if a body is going to be put in the position, that definitely comes to the board. What this does, this basically creates the seat, the position, And then once the position is created, the body doesn't get into the seat until it comes to the board. So we really don't hire anyone until it goes to the board. But the grant may say, oh, you need to add 2 teacher on assignment or an office clerk to carry out this. So once the grant comes on board and we get the funding, we add the positions. When the individuals are hired, that comes to the board.
So can I just say, though, Everton, and I truly appreciate that clear explanation. The issue I have, right, is that if I'm out in this community and I decide to look at the budget from last year to compare from this year, I'm just reading the positions as they are written and stated, and I recall from last year. So I didn't remember exact numbers, so this is why I had to go back to last year's number, because I knew that the numbers did not reflect the numbers from last year. I didn't have that detailed number to the, to the very percentage. But I feel like we're doing a disservice to the community when we're listing numbers and not clearly explaining it in the way that you just explained it. I would like us to try to figure out how this is communicated publicly from year to year, and when we see changes this drastically. Because right now what it looks like, I'll be honest, it looks like we said we underhired people when in fact we overhired them. And I hear what you're saying, that we necessarily didn't hire all these additional 78 positions, but it's hard to grasp where we really are when we have so many different numbers out there floating from one year to the next.
Okay. I'll take a look at it and see how we can, even if it's on the same page, put a set of wordings at the bottom to explain that.
Yeah.
So we
A
could,
footnote.
we could
Yeah,
do that, right.
a footnote.
Okay. Commissioner Davis? No? Okay, it's back to you, Commissioner LeBron.
All right, section 3, page 22, and this is my last but most critical one. Our fixed obligations with variability. So, fixed obligations has a huge spike. I wanted to understand if there was some predictability around any of these trends from last year. The first line, fixed obligations with variability, will increase by 15 million to 183.4 million. So I just needed to understand the spikes in all of these costs. Is there any way for us to manage this? Is this a trend that we, again, had some predictability from last year on? The busing increases also jumped, and I needed to have a detailed reason why, in terms of, is it because bus route changes? I know that we have an increase in charter schools. I just can't understand the jump from transportation costs. I have other questions, so I'll stop there and let you answer from there.
So if you go to section 3, page 19, if we could bring that up so that everyone can see where we're talking about. Right there. So if you look at the changes in the fixed obligation of your far right-hand side, the $15 million, 11.5 of that was as a result of charter school. So 2 things happening on charter school. Enrollment went up because schools are growing out. My original projection was that we were going to have about 400 students going to charter school this year, but one charter school is planning on closing those 300 students. They either are going to come back to the district or they're going to go to other charter school. But based upon the capacity of the charter school, they can only go up by 400. So they can't take 700, so we reduced our number by about to our manageable amount. But charter school tuition rate is going up by 4%. So when you start calculating 4% of what we pay, the state hasn't given us the new rate, but there's a formula built into charter school legislature, so you can go in and calculate it. And it's, for us, it's the lower of 4.1% or 4.2%. So it's going to be 4-point-something%.
But we're reimbursed for that.
No.
We're not reimbursed for charter school tuition?
No. Hold on to that.
Okay.
To transitional aid. And we'll talk about transitional aid in a little while. So that's where the 11 million is coming from. The other 2.5 is for contract transportation. In the RTS contract, there is an inbuilt 2.5% increase year over year. And I think it's also in the first student contract. So those are things that we know are going to happen. So when we're doing our $40 million forecast, we put those things in our assumption because we know that they're going to happen. So that's why where you're seeing the $15 million.
Right, but transportation is reimbursable by 90%. That's
Right.
Okay.
So then as you go to your transportation aid, what we spend this year, we're going to get it the following year. So for 1920.
But only 90%, not at the full amount.
Right.
So we'll still incur the 10% debt one way or the other.
Exactly, but you don't get the reimbursement until the following year. So transportation aid is always lagging 1 year behind. So many times when people say, let's cut transportation costs for this year, then two things happen. Yes, we see the numbers go down, but next year I have to reduce my revenue because you've gone down $7 million this year. The state is going to take 90% of that $7 million back. So I can see my revenue for the following year. So as I do my 10-year projection or 5-year projection, a reduction in transportation aid means my revenue for the following year is going down as well. So we manage that. As it relates to charter school transitional aid, and I think that's where you were alluding to the fact that we get reimbursed. There is a formula, there's a three-tier approach that the state does and uses to reimburse for transitional aid. And what that transitional aid is meant to do is because they know that when you start losing students to charter school, you can't just turn around and reduce your footprint and reduce your school size and your capacity immediately. So they give you this aid to help you transition over a 3-year period. So in any particular year, they go back 1 year, look at the increase in enrollment or the change in enrollment for that year, multiply that by the charter school tuition, and then give you 80% of that. That's the first tier. The second tier is they go the year prior to that, look at the increase in charter enrollment, multiply by the tuition, and you get 60% of that back. The third tier is going back 1 year even further. Same concept, tuition times the change in enrollment, but this time it's multiplied by 40%. So you will realize that over the year you go from 80% to 60% to 40%. 3 years ago, our charter school enrollment went up by 750 or 740. 2 years ago, it went up by 459. Last year, it went up by 252. So as you see those numbers go down, that's why you see a dip in your transitional aid, because if the increase is small and you're getting 80% of that, you're going to have a small dollar amount. When you take the large amount of the 743 years ago, multiply that by a lower tuition rate, and then you're only getting 40% of that small amount. And how I figured that out is because I had a problem when I saw the number, so I actually took the state formula and created a spreadsheet that creates the formula and dropped my numbers in, and it came up to the dollar that they have. So that's why I understand it so well, because I had to create a spreadsheet to understand it. So
that also assumes that at the same time you're doing that, you're reducing your footprint.
Yes, that's what the plan is.
Because you're losing the student. If you don't reduce the footprint, then obviously that's a big issue.
It's going to cost you more.
Because if you look at between the year that we start charter school at 659 to the 6,000, we have gone down by about 5,500 students. If we say that a school is 550 students, in essence, you basically should close 10 buildings based upon the trend. But over the years, we haven't reduced our footprint that much. So when you look at the capacity, we have excess capacity, and that's one of the reasons when we talk about early college, the state doesn't look at what's in the building where early college is. They look at your capacity throughout the district. So when we talk about capacity for early college, we were not talking about what is at foundation. They look at your whole footprint throughout the district and say, yes, For example, you have space at Leadership Academy. So when they look at that, they said, we're not going to give you aid for it because you can put the students there. Now, whether the students want to go or not, that's a different situation, but they say you have space. So,
if I might add, though, the burden of the charter schools, though, is that they can and do close with very little advance notice. So we have to sort of hold a certain amount, and who knows what the right amount is, of capacity in reserve.
yes.
And part of the reason we're able to do it now is that we have buildings that we're using for swing space, but the day will come when when we don't have to have swing space anymore. And then the question that we have to ask the state and hope that they have an answer by then is, what are we supposed to do if a charter school loses its charter and we have to reabsorb 2,000 students, and now we don't have the excess capacity because the state insisted that we downsize once we didn't need that space for swing space anymore. The obligations are in one direction right now, and we have to build in some capacity to understand that it's a two-way street. And the example that you just gave was perfect. We know one of the schools is going to close, but the capacity out there in charter schools is limited. Right. So we know we're going to be receiving some of those charter school students back. Commissioner Hallmark?
Seems like the capacity, the risk that we would need to provide would be to take the size of the largest charter school and have that many extra seats left.
That's a good strategy, sure. Okay, any further questions? Commissioner White?
Yep, just a comment. I am always impressed with the comprehensive nature of your knowledge, Everton. I know Dan and others, I feel very blessed to have you. And there's a couple of positions where we require that our employees know a lot about a lot of things. Yours is one of them. I also think of Mike Schmidt because he has to be like everywhere, you have to be like everywhere. And it gives me a great degree of confidence to hear you talk about our operations in such a nuanced way, in such a detailed way. So I just wanted to, I know my colleagues share my appreciation for the diligence and the serious way you go about doing your job and providing us the information we need. It is really appreciated, and I must say on a personal note, it makes me very proud to see, the news sometimes shows, particularly African American men, in not such a positive light. And it's your knowledge is something that should give everybody, without regard to race, a great degree of pride. But I just want to say, as an African American man, I'm proud to see another African American man do well by the citizens of this community. There are many of them out there, and you are just one of them. But it's much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks for those remarks. You always make my job easy by not leaving the thank yous for me as the facilitator. Are there any other questions on sections 1 through 3? Okay, with that.
Commissioner Powell, two things. Yes. We asked about the nursing.
I did.
You did? I got confirmation. I texted the Big Five, and it is in the governor's budget. So the $1.2 million is in. And then the other thing, as it relates to the policy about the reference to the Finance Committee, we can put a footnote until we change the policy, because that document is actually a board policy. So we can put a footnote to explain that, but we can't change the word in there because it's a board policy.
Okay.
Commissioner, excuse
Yes.
me. In response to Commissioner Davis's question about our ability to translate for any parent or family who comes in during the budget hearing, we have the capacity to translate 105 languages.
And that's through a contract that we
Yes.
hold. Okay.
So
just as the administration has had an opportunity to fill in some of the blanks, We will have an opportunity at our next budget deliberation to ask any alibi questions. That's military speak for, I meant to ask it last time. Just because we've moved on to sections 4 through 6 doesn't mean you don't get to ask it. However, if that question comes to you between now and then, please put it in writing. Please submit it to Kalia so that we can get answers for everyone. And I want to thank everyone in the audience for bearing witness. I want to thank my colleagues for participating actively, and I hope that in our next deliberation, now that the patterns are set and there's a level of trust that every question will be afforded time to be asked and answered, that things will go smoothly, okay? I'm going to hand it, Commissioner Davis, yes.
You said the next time is on 4, 5, 6, and 7. I don't think we have 5.
Sorry, is it just section 4?
Oh, sorry, what was the question?
What sections are covered? 4, 5, 6, and 7.
So
I don't think we have 5.
As it relates to section 5, we're pulling in some data. We're pulling them today, and what we're doing is consolidating those, and you will have those tomorrow.
Okay. So if that does not give you the time to ask questions, that's the area that will get alibied for our third deliberation session, okay? You will always get the opportunity to ask your questions, even if the information we need to base those questions isn't available in a timely fashion. But speaking of timely, we did get our capital improvement plan in with the main budget, which is, it's been years since we got a capital improvement plan with the main budget book. So that's my personal thank you to the administration for pulling that off. And once again, thank you for making this whole process work, everyone in the room. And I'm going to turn the gavel back over to the board president.
All right, all I need is a motion to adjourn. It's been moved by Commissioner Hallmark. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner LeBron. All those in favor say hearty aye. Aye. Any nays? No? Sure? All right, good night, everybody. Thank you.